everyone, and welcome to another Thread Town Hall. I am Barbara, and today your panel consists of Lori Winter, CEO of Thread, alongside Scott Mastley and Matt Mitcham. Before we get started, a few housekeeping items. You guys are all on mute right now, but we want to hear from you. Please use the chat in the bottom right-hand corner. The chat is moderated, so nobody else can see your questions aside from us, the panel, and that's just for privacy purposes. If you have hard time, please call in. The numbers in your invite or in the top right corner under event board. You can also find the slides from today's presentation there as well. And with that, I will turn it over to Lori Winters.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Lori Winters, CEO, founder of Thread. And if somebody would just chat and tell me that you can hear me, just a couple of people would be awesome. That way I know that we're not wasting your time. Perfect. Thank you so much. Just want a couple things. Thank you again for attending these town halls. We're just trying to get as much information out to as many people as possible. As a small to mid-sized company, and most of our clients and prospects are small to mid-sized businesses as well. We're kind of all in this crazy time together, so it's a passion of ours to help everybody, whether you're a client or not, get through this time and get as much information to you as possible. So just make sure that you give us feedback. We want to hear how these are coming across to you guys, if they're helpful. Also, we'd love to hear what other information you'd like to hear about so that we can cater or we can tailor these to you guys. And we're going to continue to do it until we don't have anybody showing up. So without further ado, I am going to kick this off and try to get as much information out to you guys as possible. So we're kind of following the same premise, the big three. We're still getting a lot of questions on the PPP regarding, can you do tax deferrals? What can you do with the PPP? What about new PPP applications? Once you're on the clock, once you've received funding, what's the next step? Along with loan forgiveness. We're getting a lot of questions on loan forgiveness, so we're going to give you as much information as we can. There's still a lot of guidance that has not been released, but we are looking out for that every day. And so we're going to get that information out to you as much as we know, and then as much as we learn. We're also going to have our Chief HR Officer, Scott Mastley, is going to do a piece on HR. We've gotten a lot of questions about this. What does your work model look like? How has it changed? What do we say to employees who are ready to come back, or if they're not ready to come back, how do we rehire and hire? So we've got a piece on the HR side. We're also going to talk a little bit about the software enhancements. So if you're a current client, the software enhancement piece will be important. If you're not, I think it's still important to listen to this to make sure that you talk to your payroll provider and ask them what they're doing for this, because they should have answers for you as well. So I'm going to cover the PPP and the funding side. And I created this chart. You're going to get a copy of this after. And I kind of like this because it shows the different funding options that are available, whether it's the PPP, the EIDL loans through the SBA, the employee retention tax credit, payroll tax deferral, and the new thing that's coming out called Main Street lending, which we don't have a lot of information on. It's expected May 1st. We'll see if that happens. So I'm not going to really spend too much time on that. But a couple of things to point out. Everybody really knows at this point the PPP lending. This is the 2.5 times average monthly payroll that a piece, if not all, can become forgiven. So more of a grant. And the piece that's not forgiven becomes a 2-year amortized loan with a 1% interest rate. So that's for sole proprietors, independent contractors, companies with fewer than 500 employees, up to $10 million. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a second, just to give you a little more information. The EIDL is the economic injury disaster loans through the SBA. It's more of a traditional SBA type lending, but there is a grant piece of it. It's up to $1,000 per employee, up to $10,000. And that is something that if you're having a hard time getting the PPP, or it doesn't fit the forgiveness may not fit for you, the SBA is still getting these loans out. It just takes a little bit of time. The employee retention tax credit, this is an alternative to the PPP. So if you're a business where either you've been forced to shut down, partially or fully shut down, or you have 50% drop or more in quarterly gross receipts, this can be another option for you. You don't have to get approved for it, but you can get a tax credit against employee wages. And there are some cases where this is a better plan than the PPP. There's also the payroll tax deferral, which is the employer portion of Social Security tax, the 6.2% that can be deferred. Half of it will be due at the end of 2021 and the other half by the end of 2022. There is a new guidance. I talked about this last time, but I want to just make sure that reiterate this is that you can defer this employer Social Security tax even if you took the PPP loan up to a point. And I'm going to talk about that. So real quickly, the new guidance on April 10th that came out is you can take the tax deferral even if you took a PPP loan until the forgiveness is granted. So I wanted to give a real quick example. Say that you received your PPP funding on April 30th, and you plan to use that to make payroll for May and June. Then you submit your documentation to the lender for loan forgiveness, which I'm going to talk about, but you will be required to do that to get the forgiveness piece. You receive your loan forgiveness from your lender on September 30th. This is just an example. The latest guidance allows the employer to defer all employer Social Security tax from that May 1st until September 30th when you're given that the forgiveness amount by your lender. And that amount that you deferred, 50% of it is due at the end of 2021 and 50% is due at the end of 2022. So again, this is just a way to improve your cash flow during this time. Even if you have the PPP, you just have to make sure the timing is, you need to follow the timing exactly. So I wanted to throw this out there. I've talked to several clients recently that still have not gotten PPP funding. As we all probably know, there's new money that's been approved for the PPP fund. It is going to run out very quickly. We know that. So if you have not applied yet, do it now. Even if you're worried that the funds are going to run out, get in line. And you may want to get in line to multiple lenders. And I know some people are saying out there not to do that. You can't receive 2 PPP loans. But if you apply to multiple lenders, and one of them, the first one that gets your E-Tran SBA number is the one that's going to get the loan. So you may want to apply to a couple. Make sure that you check your documentation for errors, because I've seen examples of these worksheets and loan applications getting thrown out. And if it gets thrown out, you're getting to the back of the line, which you don't want. The main way to make sure, if you we have a CARES Act report you can use, make sure all your documentation is in line. But as you create the worksheet for the lender, make sure to add notes to anything that may throw off your gross payroll numbers. And here's an example. If you have 2% S-Corp health insurance, your gross payroll reports could be different from your 941s and from your monthly average payroll figures. So lenders they're inundated with applications. They're looking for reasons to reject these. So just make sure you make a lot of notes for anything that could throw those numbers off. If you're with a large bank, I've heard that there are a lot of issues with large banks. There's just too many of them, too many applications. There are other financial technology firms that are accepting these. Cabbage is one. PayPal, I've heard, and I've also heard QuickBooks is one that's accepting. So you may want to try some of these fintech firms as well as your bank. So I would also suggest that if you have not received the PPP funding, go ahead and submit the EIDL loan through the SBA. And, it takes a little while, but you could get that instead if the PPP funding runs out. But either way, I would get in line for the funding if you have not already received it. So now say that you did receive the PPP, you're one of the lucky ones, and you got in line and you got the funding, and now your 8 weeks you're on the clock. Make sure that you are working with a CPA, your accountant, or your CFO, or just someone in your office to really, really track these expenses. Plan your 8 weeks out very carefully. The guidance right now is not exactly clear on whether they're going to be looking at cash or accrual-based accounting. So for example, are they looking at pay dates or pay period dates? Right now we're planning for cash basis, so we're going on check dates. But you want to make sure that you are planning those 8 weeks out carefully to get the full 2 months worth of payroll calculated. Also, obviously, you can use this money toward rent, mortgage interest, so not principal payments, but mortgage interest, and utilities. Utilities are listed right now as gas, power, water, transportation, telephone, and internet. So make sure you're tracking all of these expenses. Your payroll reports are going to need to be able to subtract the over 100,000 equivalent salaries. You're going to need to be able to take out the federal employer tax and other items that are not available for forgiveness. So for instance, and Matt, in a minute, our COO is going to talk a little bit about our iSolved reports, but a report is being created for us that will give you this data so that you'll be able to track the payroll figures that you will be submitting for forgiveness. So just make sure you keep really, really good records and you don't give any reason that something should not be forgiven. Now, loan forgiveness, we've had a lot of questions on this, so I'm going to do my best to cover what we know so far and give a couple examples. So you will be required to submit a forgiveness application to the lender. They're not going to just automatically forgive this. The application is not yet available, but as soon as it is, we will get information out and we're going to help you with how to calculate and how to fill this application out. Make sure you have payroll documents to support the items that you're going to need, which is number of employees and wages paid. And then you're going to want a lot of documentation on any non-payroll qualified expenses such as rent, mortgage interest, and utilities. So just keep really good track. Obviously, I think everybody knows this by now, 75% of the funding has to be spent on payroll costs. Only 25% can be spent on qualified non-payroll expenses. And then you're going to get potentially a reduction in the forgiveness. It's going to depend on your number of full-time equivalent employees. So you get to pick whichever's best for you, what time frame you're going to compare your coverage period to. You can use February 15th of 2019 through June 30th of 2019 to compare, or you can use January and February of 2020. Or if you're a seasonal employer, you use February 15th, 2019 through June 30th, 2019. So you need to make sure that you're comparing, that this is something that could reduce the amount of forgiveness. And then the other piece that will reduce it is reduction in wages that are greater than 25%. So they only care about employees that make less than $100,000. So if you have an employee over $100,000, you could have reduced them more than 25%, and that should not be a problem. But the reduction in wages greater than 25% for people under 100,000 are what they're going to focus on. You will have until June 30th to restore your full-time equivalent employees and wages. I'm going to give you a little bit of an example. This may be a little bit hard to see, but you're going to get a copy of these after. Here's an example of a full-time equivalent reduction. You had a $500,000 loan and assume that you spent it all on qualified expenses. Your average number of full-time equivalents from February last year to June was 75, and your average FTEs during the covered period now, following your first loan disbursement, is 55. So now you calculate that. 55 divided by 75 is 73%. You're going to take that 500,000, multiply it by 73%, and 365,000 will be the forgiven amount. The rest of it, 135,000, is going to be a loan at 1%, paid over 2 months, deferred for the first 6. Now here's an example of wages over 25% reduction. So say your loan was issued on April 1st of this year. You are going to go employee by employee on this. So in Q1, they made $20,000. Now during the 8-week covered period, you paid them $13,000. So you reduced their wages. The amount of the forgiveness reduction is going to be that 20 minus 13 or 7,000. And then you're going to figure out, you get 25% of a reduction as a freebie. So that 25% of the $20,000, you would subtract the $5,000 from the $7,000, and the reduction of forgiveness is $2,000. I know it's a little confusing. I'll be glad to help anybody that has a question on that. But as of right now, that is what these are the two main items that will cause you to lose some of your loan as a forgiven grant type loan. Your lender supposedly, we'll see how this plays out, has 60 days to issue forgiveness after the application for forgiveness is submitted. And we are expecting a good amount more of SBA guidance, and we're hoping that we get it soon, since a lot of us have received the PPP funding and we want to make sure we're doing all the right things. So that is what we have so far on the forgiveness, and we'll be answering questions after this. We're going to try to leave at least half of our time open for questions that were either previously submitted or submitted during the chat. So now, without listening to me anymore, I'm going to hand this off to Scott, who's our Chief HR Officer, and he's going to help on some of the HR related items.
Thanks, Lori. I appreciate it. I tried to draft these slides based on the most common questions that I'm getting right now. A lot of them are about return to work and how do we reopen the office and how do we do things going forward. So I'm just going to hit some of those key points, and then we'll follow up with your questions like Lori said at the end. But one of the things to think about is, how has your model changed? Do you have new opportunities for business that you didn't think of before? You know, we have medical offices that have switched to telemedicine almost completely right now, and they're realizing that that's a pretty good opportunity for them to take advantage of, right? We have distribution companies that have realized they can use their distribution channels to distribute things that everybody's wanting, that are in demand right now. So little pivots that you can make for your business that might be able to help you recover from this. Just be aware of those and pay attention to those and see if there's things you need to change in your business relative to that. So if you're changing the way you operate, you might also need to look at changing or adjusting policies, safety procedures, your recruiting and hiring practices, things like that. So are there new ways to work? Well, I've talked to many companies who mentioned that prior to this situation, they were totally against people working from home. And now they've realized that they do have some positions, if not all, that could work from home frequently without any disruption to their productivity. So something to think about as well. Are there new ways to work? And does that create opportunities for you in terms of your candidate? Expand your candidate pool, right? So if you were looking to hire somebody to work in your office and be sitting at a desk each day prior to this, and now you're identifying a position where someone can work remotely, now instead of only interviewing people who are within a 30-minute drive, you can literally expand that across the United States if you want, internationally if you want. That gets a little more complicated, but even if you expand it to multiple states, now you've really increased the talent pool that you're looking at. So that's something to think about as well. And then if you are changing some of that, how do you adjust your recruiting process? And you want to make sure you document your process so that it's easy to follow and so that you can train people as you grow. Now, a lot of the guidance that's out there right now is geared towards larger businesses. So a lot of the information you see from law firms and other sites have things about your talent acquisition teams and your chief COVID officers and all of those things that a lot of our clients and prospects are not going to have as small businesses. So what you have to do is take this information that's out there, trim it down a little bit, and make it practical for small business. And we can do that. We can simplify almost everything that they're saying needs to be done in a way that will fit a small business. And that's how we need to do that. So big question is, what if we have decided that we're not going to be able to all of our employees back? So you got multiple scenarios there. You may have employees overall that you've decided that you might not be able to bring back, or you may have some employees in a position and other employees in the same position that you're not going to bring back. What you want to do ideally is determine what the objective reasons are for that, non-discriminatory reasons. And it can be based on your business model change right now and how that affects the structure of your employees and the organization. And you want to document how you've made that decision so that if it's ever challenged later on based on any kind of protected class, you can say, this is why we chose those people. If you want to be as safe as you possibly can be, you could base the return on, we can only return a certain number of employees, and so we're going to base that number on seniority. It could be performance, if you can prove performance, if you've tracked it sufficiently so that you can prove that you're using that as the criteria. Tenure, things like that, that's what you're looking at. Or you can use other criteria. So maybe it's just that your business model has changed and you don't need certain positions or as many of that position as you had before. And so you just want to think through that process and document as well as you can. And what do you say to your active employees who are affected by this as well? They're missing their friends. They're wondering if they're going to come back. And I encourage you to be as transparent as possible. Lori has done a great job leading our company in terms of being transparent all the time. Here's what we're trying to do to get through this. Here's how we're going to work going forward. Here are my expectations as a leader. This is why I think that way. All of that is important for your employees to hear and understand. And if you're making changes, I suggest you just let them know what those changes are, why they need to be made, and move forward. If you're talking to furloughed employees, it is okay to reach out to them and say, look, we wish we could predict the future. We don't know exactly when we will return to our full capacity or if we will look the same way we looked before this happened. We're kind of playing it day by day, week by week. We're planning to return people to work when we're able to do so. And I understand this is a vague message, but you don't want to commit to something that you can't follow through on. So it is okay to tell people, here's our plan. There's no promises. For the people that you are able to return to work, you want to make sure that you give them some information about when they're expected to come back to work. And I'll talk about that in a second. And then another question I'm getting a lot is, what if we have some employees who we really don't want to bring back, even though we could? And that's a legit question. You've got to run your business. So you do want to think about this. And if you have employees who you're not going to bring back, questions have been, do we send them a severance agreement and pay them a little money? Well, that is a possibility. But if you've already laid people off, you don't want to kind of stir that back up by saying, now we're going to pay you some additional money, but we also want to get you to sign this agreement, and they may raise an eyebrow at that. It is okay to reach out to some of those folks if you've started bringing employees back and you know that they're not coming back under any circumstance, to say, look, we've kind of modeled out what our team is going to look like in the next couple months, and just wanted to let you know that we think we've already filled those slots, and we hate to lose good people, but we understand if you need to search, and please let us know if you found an opportunity in the meantime, because we're not going to limit your opportunities in that way. So you can talk to people about that as well, so they understand that they might not be coming back. And if you want to tell them straight out, we're not going to have a position for you, you can. That's a little more aggressive, but I have talked to some owners who want to do that. So before you have that conversation, please talk with us or your HR team or your legal counsel to make sure you're saying the right things. So what do you do when you do rehire people or bring them back? So if they were on a furlough, meaning they weren't separated from payroll, and maybe they were even still on your benefits, then you can keep them going with their benefits. If their benefits shut down, once you reactivate them, those should kick back in. You need to talk with your broker, make sure there's not another waiting period built in based on the amount of time that they were out. Some states and some plans do say if you've been furloughed and you've been out for a certain period of time, you've got to follow certain procedures to restart those benefits. So just check with your broker on that. But generally with a furlough employee, you're just giving them a written notice saying you're great news. We're ready to bring you back to work. Please plan to be at our office or whatever it is on this date at this time. You'll be operating in the same capacity at, if it's the same pay, fill in all those blanks, right? And then what you want to add to that, which is new, is these are the steps we're taking to ensure your safety going forward as a team. And you can talk about what you're doing in the office, facility-wise. If you've renegotiated contracts with your company who's cleaning your office or facilities, you can talk about that. Make sure they've included disinfectants instead of just cleaners, and that we're cleaning doorknobs and things like that, right? And then if you have employees who were laid off or were terminated, you would give them like a new offer letter and say, we want to rehire you. We want to bring you back to work, lay out the terms, get their acceptance, just like you're rehiring somebody who had left, 2 years ago, right? You won't have to redo I-9s and E-Verify because it hasn't been long enough. You could still use those. So it's up to you how much of the full onboarding process you want to go to. Do you want to do background checks and drug screens on people? If you're a certified drug-free workplace, you might want to do that. But otherwise, nobody's saying you have to unless you're bound to do some of those things due to a contract, right? So we could talk about that too. How much is involved and how much do we have to go through to bring people back if we're rehiring them? And then check your state laws about that as well. And now I'm going to hand it over to Matt Mitcham, our Chief Operating Officer, who's going to hit some of the specifics of what our human capital management system can do to help you with all of this.
Thanks, Scott. Again, my name is Matt Mitcham. I know we have all probably gotten very intimate with technology over the last month. I think I'm pretty sure my 2-year-old knows how to use Zoom now officially. But as we move forward to this, I know technology has really allowed us to connect in a lot of ways too. And so we want to talk to you about iSolved. Our team has been very, very busy, as you can imagine. But the simple thing that we want you to know, and especially for those clients that are with us or that are on the platform, I think we're close to collectively around 5 million companies now across the United States that are on the iSolved platform, is that we got you covered. Our developers have been working around the clock, I'm sure with a glass of wine or something at the end of the day, but working both on daily and weekly software updates as guidance is being released. And as you guys know, this thing is changing quickly. The conversation we're having right now in the next couple of days may pivot a little bit, and we'll be right back with more information for you. But the basic thing is with all of the options that Lori showed in the beginning, iSolved is now set up to configure and track that for you. And so we try to simplify this as much as possible because we know it has been a sip from a fire hose for so many of you trying to understand this. So really all we're asking of you is to let us know, reach out to your account manager and tell us the relief option that you have decided that's best for your business. And we are not full-on consultants, but we will do everything we can to help guide you in what might be the best option if you haven't chosen that yet for you. And then our team will personally configure your account to set up to make sure that you're taking advantage of every bit of some of these relief options in iSolved. So as we talked about enhancements, we had about 4 or 5 releases just in the last 7 days that we wanted to let you know of what's coming in. But some of the biggest system updates that we've had, I know many of you have taken advantage of our PPP report when you guys were applying for your loans. So if for those that are going through round 2 to try to do that, again, please remember we have a CARES Act report that will help you with that loan application. But here's a couple new ones that are coming through. One, we have, for those that have decided that the employee retention tax credit is going to be the better option versus the Paycheck Protection Program. And we know we've talked to a couple of you clients that have decided that that is the case. We now have a new report we'll talk about here in a second. We also now have, for those that are choosing to defer the employer social tax, we now have a way to keep track of that for you so you can keep an idea of what that giving you a large sum of money that we need to pull to get those taxes made up. So the system will easily be able to track this for you, and that will be available on 5/1. Another report that we've made available. So for those, again, in choosing the employee retention tax credit, we have now built out a report that is available in the system to help you track both on a per employee basis as well as a company basis for those business credits that can be available. And then the system can automatically apply that to the payroll as well. So again, this is a better one-on-one situation. We recommend you reach out to your account manager. We will help take all the complexity out of this and simplify this for you as much as possible. And then the most popular one, which I know all of you will be dying to see this. So coming May 8th is our tentative release date, but we will be building a PPP loan forgiveness report for you to help when you do apply to the lender for that loan forgiveness. One of the themes that you've heard Lori say is documentation. Having great documentation, we cannot stress that enough, of how well that is going to set you up for both the application process and for forgiveness. And we want to give you that authority with great information, great reporting, so that when you apply for this, you'll be able to use this forgiveness report to help take out some of those ER taxes that we mentioned, some of those that the wages that are under 100,000, or excuse me, they're over 100,000. This report will be available as soon as we get guidance. So this is one of those things that we are chomping at the bit to get. And I know all of us are waiting for SBA official guidance. We anticipate that anywhere within the next day or two. We are kind of getting near day 30 of when that was supposed to be released. And as soon as that report is available and the guidance is issued, our developers will then turn that around and have that report available for you. So trust me, we know this will be a probably most used report for those that have applied for this program. We will let you know as soon as it's available, and most likely might be doing another town hall regarding that. And then last but not least, for the tracking aspect of this, we do have some enhancements coming in May. I know that's a little bit ways out, but we're going to be having 3 new tax credits related to what's happening in the CARES Act, and these labor GL rules will be built. So this is for all those clients that use our GL import into their accounting software. If you don't do that, highly recommend you talk to your account manager about that feature, but those will be coming at the end of the month. And then the last thing I wanted to say too is obviously this is changing a lot of the way that we work. A lot of us are going to be remote or continue to be maybe in a hybrid model. And so again, we've had several clients that have started to use what we call our iSolve Learn Pro, which is our online learning. And we do think that has to become more of a constant. So again, I want to encourage you to talk to your account manager about that. We have a lot of clients that are trying to move a lot of their training and stuff to an online platform that we have for you. So we'll hear a little bit more about that and ways that we're trying to help you pivot your business with the technology infrastructure that you need. So without that, I guess we'll turn it over to Q&A, and Barb, Lori.
Awesome. Yeah, Barb, you're up. You go ahead, and Barb's going to go through some of the submitted questions, and then we'll go through any questions that you guys have put on the chat. We're gonna answer as well to the best of our ability.
All right. Actually, Lori, Trudy chatted in while you were doing your part of the presentation. She said, when you say cash basis and check date, can we use the date that the withdrawal comes out of our account, which is 4 days before our check date?
So there's no guidance yet on this, and that's why I mentioned that we're waiting to find out exactly. I think, when they came up with the rules around this, they're not thinking the specifics that all of us think about. It was just trying to get it done quickly. So we don't really know exactly whether it's going to be, what day that matters, what day I would guess it's probably going to be check date. The actual check date. But the most important thing is just to make sure, whether it's check date, pay period date, withdrawal date, that you get the maximum number in and that you cover 2 full months worth of payroll. So we'll get more info out on that as soon as we get it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Scott, Michelle asks, if an employee was out for 2 weeks and was paid 80 hours of COVID-19 pay and then stated that they relapsed, are we required as a company to pay them an additional 80 hours of COVID-19 sick pay?
Good question. No, you're not. Simple answer is no. Once you've paid that 80 hours of the emergency paid sick leave under the Families First Act, you're not required to pay more of that. It's an 80-hour max, so 2 weeks of pay. If they exhausted that 2-week period and still need to stay out, that's when you can look at a couple things. One, do you have company PTO, sick time, vacation time that they might be able to take advantage of? If they've used all of that time already then would they go on an unpaid leave? Are they eligible for that expanded FMLA? Again, that expanded FMLA leave is only for people who cannot work or telework because they're home to take care of kids who are under 18 or over 18 if they have special needs because their child care providers are not available. That's the only reason that paid FMLA is available. So if they're not eligible for that, they've already used their emergency paid sick leave, they would not be eligible to use more, but they could use your company paid leave if they had it available. If they didn't, then they could go on some kind of unpaid leave as an accommodation if you needed to do that.
Okay, thank you. Lori, for you, Mika asks, can you get loan forgiveness on the total amounts used for payroll, rent, and utilities if you give back what's left of the loan that you didn't use?
It's a good question. What I've recommended people to do, that if they don't feel like they're going to use the whole amount, that they hold on to the piece that they don't feel like they're going to use that would go toward the forgiveness. And you either have a choice. You can keep that as a loan. It's a very low interest loan for, it's a 2-year payout loan that is deferred for 6 months. Or there could be an ability to pay that piece back, So they haven't really, the SBA hasn't clarified that. But I've recommended for people just to hold on to that piece of the money that they don't need, and until there's further guidance, and then you can make an informed decision.
Okay, thanks, Lori. Scott, for you, Matt asks, when an employee has made the decision to stay home rather than come to work, we are an essential business and remain open, can that employee file for unemployment even though we didn't furlough them or lay them off?
Yeah, this is probably the most difficult issue that I'm dealing with on a daily basis right now is what do we do when an employee doesn't want to come back to work, right? And if you're an essential business and you're open, that's where that part of the message to all employees and what you're doing on a daily basis for safety becomes really important, because you can take away most of that argument where employees are saying, I don't feel safe coming back to work, if you are creating a safe workplace. So if you have a safety procedure in place and you say, this is who's responsible for disinfecting our office and our facilities all the time, how often they're doing it, what they're using, how they're held accountable for that, and what protocol we have in place for all of our active employees right now to make sure you're safe, and for visitors and everything else. If you've got that, then you can legitimately say, look, we think we have a pretty safe workplace, right? You're following CDC guidance and everything else. Now, with that, the answer to the question for unemployment is, if you have the job for the person and they're saying, I don't want it, or I'm not ready to come back, then at that point, you would basically take them off of your list if you're filing on behalf of employees like in Georgia, and they would have to file their own claim. Now, we can't determine if they're eligible to receive benefits or not, or how much they would receive. That's all your state workers' comp agency will decide that. But they could file their own claim and say, I'm unemployed. They would have to deal with some of the back and forth, and you may even get sucked into that as well in terms of an explanation of what's going on. But if you just said, we are an essential business, we're open, we're following all the safety protocols, we have a job available, and the person is saying they're not safe. Now, there's some other parts of that. If someone is a high-risk individual due to age or an immune disorder or something like that, then they may have a legitimate concern about coming back to work and just being around people for a little while. In that case, you might just want to say, can we provide some kind of accommodation, whether it's a extended leave, unpaid leave. But if you eventually have someone who just continually says, I don't know when I'm going to want to come back, then you may, after taking a kind of slow conservative course of doing everything else, at that point, then tell somebody, look, we've got to, make a transition here if you're not going to commit to coming back at any time when we really need to fill this position. So again, I would say talk to HR before you deliver that message, but there are steps you can take before you get there.
Awesome, thanks. I think you also covered some questions from Veronica and Angel as well. So
bonus.
Yeah. Lori, Sherry asked, and I believe you covered this in the presentation earlier, but Related to the PPP and returning laid off personnel, do you have to bring back the same employees or simply the same number? And what's the requirement on making salaries whole again for those who have had reduced wages?
So I've seen that question. I've heard that question a lot. I've researched that as well. And the only guidance that I really depend on is if it's from the SBA or the Treasury, because there's a lot on the internet of everybody and their brother making interpretations. So unless I see it from one of them, I don't buy into it yet. But I have seen some potential talk about it's only FTEs. So it doesn't have to be the same people. It just has to be the same number of full-time equivalents. My belief is it's going to go to that, but we don't know that for sure. So because the only issue that I have with that is since there's also a potential reduction based on reduced wages, and that is supposed to be by employee, is there going to be a little loophole that you have to have the same people? As of right now, I don't think that's going to be the case. I think it's going to be just full-time equivalents. They just want to make sure that you have the same number of people on the payroll, but that is not 100%. So I wouldn't take that for sure yet. I am looking at the guidance every single day, multiple times. So as soon as I have an exact answer for that, I'll let you know. And what was the second question?
The second question in that was, sorry, give me just 1 second. I hit it.
It was full-time equivalents. I can't remember. We'll come back to that. Go to the next one and then come back to that one, Barb.
What's the requirement on making salaries whole again for those who've had reduced wages?
So that has to be, making salaries whole has to be by June 30th. And it has to be, you have to be no more than 25% reduction in their wages. So you still could be under, you could be paying them less, but as long as it's not more than 25% less than what they were making, and it only pertains to employees that make under $100,000. So you have until June 30th to do that, to make them whole. And whole means no more than 25% reduction.
Gotcha. All right. Matt, question for you from Denise. We would like to use the CARES PPP report to calculate the items needed for forgiveness on a weekly basis. If we enter the weekly pay period, will the other items adjust accordingly, specifically the calculation for excess wages?
Denise, my recommendation on that one is, again, there's a desire, we want to maximize this loan forgiveness. And I know that we're all kind of chomping at the bit to maximize this. And my advice would be just to wait a day or two before you change your payroll or change your pay period up, and allow our developers to create this report, because I guarantee it'll probably be better than anything we could create by trying to create a weekly to maximize this payroll. So I'd try to continue to kind of keep business as usual as much as you can as far as your payroll is concerned. Again, until we get a lot of the cash versus accrual basis, which we expect in the next day or two. And then our report will then be able to support what you need for that. So my advice would be is to kind of hold off for a second until we have that and more guidance released.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. Scott, Marlowe chatted in, what if you have two employees that are high risk due to their age, 71 and 76, but they want to be at work? Is there anything you can do to keep them working from home? Should you have them sign a release because you're concerned about them not wanting to wait until phase 3 to return to work?
Yeah, that has to do with, I've had a few employees who said, or clients, sorry, who said, should we have our staff sign a waiver before they come back to work? What, can we have them kind of sign this disclaimer saying that they're not going to hold us responsible if they get the coronavirus coming back here? So that's not exactly what you asked, but that's what it made me think of. I think the only situation where that might be reasonable is in this question that you asked, which is you have people that you know are in a high risk group and they're wanting to come back to work and you might be concerned about them. I think even if you have somebody sign a waiver and come back to work, if they get the coronavirus, guess who's still going to be responsible in terms of OSHA record keeping? If you're required to keep OSHA records, is going to be the business, unless you can prove that somebody didn't get it there. So that's a tricky situation. I think you could tell people, hey, we could pay you to stay home for another 2 weeks until we make sure we're totally safe and we're doing that in your best interest, that's okay. If you're taking care of them, you're extending your PTO. And remember, you can change your policies right now. You can be a little more flexible than you normally would be. I've seen companies change their bereavement leave policies when they had employees with family members who were deceased or affected by this. I've seen companies change their PTO policy to extend it a little more, to say, look, we're going to need to give a little more here if you can afford to do that or not. But I would think the main thing is you communicate directly with those employees and say, we just want to make sure you're safe. Could you give us another week or two? And here's how we're going to take care of you during that week or two, or make it up to you when you do return to work. We're just trying to make sure our workplace is ready for your return, that kind of thing.
Okay, gotcha. Lori, Amanda asks, why is the formula for computing the loan 2.5 times the payroll/group health, but you only have 8 weeks to spend the funds?
Well, the reason for that is because you're allowed to spend up to 25% of it on other expenses. So it is you can utilize up to 25% to spend on rent, mortgage interest, utilities, which include phone, internet, gas, water, power, all that. So that's why they did 2.5 times, so that you would have some money left to pay those additional expenses.
Okay. She also wanted to know, will the pastor's housing allowance be included in the definition of payroll cost? Have we gotten guidance on that yet?
Yes, that has just been released. I think it was just released a couple days ago, and there were 3 additional questions answered. One of them was about housing allowance, and it specifically said housing allowance is included in compensation, so can be used for both calculation of the average monthly payroll, can also be used. You can use the funds to pay the housing allowance because it's considered regular compensation for that person, and it still is subject to the $100,000 threshold. So that gets added into the total compensation, and in the calculation, the 100,000 threshold is going to still come into play, including the housing allowance. But it has been spelled out in the actual documentation from the SBA and Treasury.
Okay, thanks. Nikita wants to know if the CARES Act will be extended and if there are going to be more breaks for payroll. What do you think?
God. If I knew the answer to that. They've said no, but who knows? So I think it just depends on how long this continues to shut down a large percentage of the economy. I think there's going to be pressure because what I've seen is that a lot of lenders have already maxed out their applications, and this new funding is not going to cover new applications. It's going to cover applications that they were not able to fund previously. So I think it's going to run out fairly quick. Who knows if it's going to be extended? I don't have a crystal ball, so I don't know. What I did recommend on that is, at the same time of applying for the PPP, is to also apply for the EIDL loans, the economic injury disaster loans direct through the SBA. Those take a while. And I've heard that, some people are not getting much information on whether they're getting funded quickly or not. But I would do both. I would do as much as you can. I would do deferral of the Social Security tax. I'd apply for the PPP. I would apply for the EIDL loans. The EIDL loan does have an emergency fund, the emergency cash that you're supposed to get up to $1,000 per employee. They changed it. So it's up to $1,000 per employee with a maximum of $10,000. So I would do all of those.
Okay, great. Now we've got a lot of people who've been asking Scott if we're going to have any guideline policies, templates to help people with returning their employees to work. And I do know that we've discussed it, between you and I, that we are starting to build a few things. But what templates or best practices do you have already potentially for getting people back to work for employers?
Sure. Yeah, that's the new demand for sure is, okay, what do we have that we can offer people? The challenge with that is that everybody's going to do it a little differently. So we're going to have to do a kind of skeleton, fill in the blank here according to your practice template. We are going to send everybody a checklist following this that kind of lists all of the things you should think through when you're looking at your policies. Now, remember, we're trying to include everything we can think of. So it may say, look at this policy, look at that policy. That doesn't mean you have to change every policy you've got. You just need to think about what you're doing that has affected your current procedures and policies, and then make tweaks to those to reflect what you're doing right now. So we're going to send the checklist right away to everyone who's registered for this town hall meeting. And then we're going to be working on some sample. I had a rehire process that I was looking at this morning that I want to tweak a little bit to send out to people. And then if anybody says, hey, we need a sample language, we can do that as well. I'm just trying not to overwhelm people with stuff they don't need, but I do want to send you some basics that you can tweak and use for your business.
Great, thank you. Same, still you, Scott. Elaine asks, what if employees resign in the middle of the 8-week period and you don't have time to rehire their position?
I think Elaine's probably asking about I'm guessing the FTE equivalent. So okay. That's a good question, is if they leave in the middle of this 8-week period and now they're full-time equivalent, and you don't have time to rehire that back for the loan forgiveness. That's what I'm thinking that she's talking about, the loan forgiveness.
Yeah, I think so too.
So I don't know the answer to that. If we're looking, I see what you're saying, Elaine. Like if you have determined what your full-time equivalent is from whatever period, whether it was January, February this year, or the February through June of last year, and now you're in your coverage period and you have someone resign, and now your full-time equivalent number has gone down, but you don't have time to backfill that person. So that's a really good question, and I don't have a solid answer to that, but that's not your fault. So I would hope that there would be some type of way to take someone out like that that's being used in the calculation. But I don't have an answer on that. I will research that though. That's a great question.
Thank you, Scott. Now that Bryant asked, now that my team is furloughed, is this an opportunity to reevaluate my team and possibly make a decision to not bring certain individuals back? You did touch on that earlier, but
yes, the answer is yes. Because once you have people out, now the one thing that I see in HR as a consultant that I've seen for years and years and years is businesses who should have taken action, should have done some kind of performance management, should have had a frank conversation with a underperforming employee, but were hesitant, wanted to avoid conflict, didn't want to document information. And then what happens is they end up with a claim at some point and they go, golly, we all knew this person was a problem. Why didn't we do anything? So that's my preaching point right here, which is, as the HR guy, to tell everybody is don't sit on issues like that under any normal circumstances. Address performance issues when you have them as soon as you can so that you've got that dealt with. But now that you have an opportunity to evaluate who's coming back and who's not, yes, this is a good time to say, who do we want on our team, right? Who's going to come back and contribute? Who's going to kind of be a little flexible with our new work style or work arrangements? Who is going to be willing to be open to new ideas and new protocol and all that. And I think it is okay to look at that and decide who you want to bring back and who you don't. And maybe it's an opportunity to change or improve your business going forward. You just got to be careful about the messaging. And again, I would say reach out to HR or us and sign a contract with Thread, Engage, and get your HR services so we can help you with that.
Awesome plug, Scott. Lori, Charla asks, what are transportation costs?
It's a good question. I was looking that up myself and trying to figure it out because they put transportation cost in as utilities, but did not specify what transportation costs are. So I even researched that this morning to see if I could get a final answer on that. And there's no clarification yet. So I assume that in the next day or two, there will be, hopefully, most people are just now getting the funding or got it a week ago. So the goal and hope is that by the time they clarify this, we still have time to use whatever expenses that could be for transportation. The other piece is they haven't clarified whether rent just means your rent of your office space or whether it means equipment rentals. And it would be great if it also could be used for equipment rentals, but they have not clarified that. As of right now, everybody's thinking just rent of office space. So hoping that we'll get further guidance in the next day or two, and we'll get that information out as soon as we get it.
Thank you. A lot of people ask Lori about the loan forgiveness guidelines, requiring documentation, how your forgiveness is submitted. But I feel like you covered a lot of that. Is there anything else that you wanted to speak on?
The SBA, they haven't released the application for forgiveness yet. And believe me, as soon as we get it, we'll get information out to everybody because that's going to give a lot more guidance. The main thing is, you're going to have to submit payroll reports, potentially payroll tax reports, things that will show number of employees, expenses, backup for 401k and health insurance, expenses, a backup for, the rent for your office space, mortgage interest, utilities. So we know that, and we don't know what the form looks like or any further documentation, but you're going to need to be able to have as much as possible. And if you're a client of ours, or if you're not, talk to your payroll vendor. They should have something equivalent, hopefully, but the forgiveness report that we're going to be creating will be perfect for the payroll side. It's going to account for everything that you can include and cannot include. If you run benefits through us, through the benefit admin platform, the benefits side should be in there. You probably still have to provide backup that you're being billed by the carrier. But that's all we have so far, and we'll keep you in the loop as soon as we get more.
Okay. Kelly asks, if the employer pays a 3% contribution to the employee's 401k, but only at the end of the year, can that be divided over the 12 months and put into the PPP application? Is it still qualified for forgiveness?
Yes, it's the way that they're looking at the costs or the benefit cost and the 401k contribution is what is the average monthly. So if you pay once a year, you would divide that, and you just have to give you have to show the report to the lender to show that this is an annual amount, but you would get a monthly contribution out of that if you divide that by 12. And then multiply it by 2.5. So yes.
Gotcha.
And Lori, I've spoken to a couple clients too. Some have considered, because again, I would probably wait till guidance that'll clarify this, but some clients have considered front loading that annual contribution and pay within that 8-week period for those times. So I'm not saying to do that right now, but some people are considering kind of a backup plan if that is the case, that they might give them a portion of that during that 8-week period to account for the cost.
Gotcha. Yeah. So if you pay once a year and you pay at the end of the year, but so you're not paying during this coverage period, can you at least pay some of that and get and be able to utilize those funds? That's the biggest issue is the timing of the payment.
Yep. So it may just that some clients have decided to kind of create a kind of a plan B just in case of what would that look like to front load for just that 8 weeks and make that payment to the employees, the match.
Gotcha. Thanks, guys.
Real quickly, there's another question I've been getting, which is, can we prepay additional rent? Can we prepay certain things? And as of right now, I don't think that that's a good plan for that. It doesn't mean that they won't come out with some guidance that you could, but as of right now, I wouldn't plan for that being able to be forgiven at this point.
Okay, thanks. Scott, Melissa asked, you were talking about creating a liability waiver for employees to sign when they come back to work, and are we going to need that?
No, I didn't mean to imply that I was creating a liability waiver. I was saying people have asked me about that a lot, and it's kind of like saying, hey, you're going to sign an agreement, which I've seen companies have employees sign an agreement saying if you get hurt on the job, you agree to pay for your own medical treatment and things like that. And even if you have a outstanding waiver and everybody signed it and dated and it's notarized and everything, when they get hurt on the job, guess who's paying for it? The company. So sometimes waivers don't really mean anything. The only time I would think there's maybe two situations where a waiver might be okay. One would be if you have, like one of our clients has groups who come in for tennis lessons, right? And they may have their customers sign a waiver saying, I am choosing voluntarily to participate in a group activity. And I understand that there are risks associated along with that, even though the company is taking steps to mitigate those risks. This is my decision, and that I will not, follow up and say you're responsible if I get sick, right? So I could see that being upheld. But in terms of having employees sign waivers, that's usually not going to be beneficial, or I wouldn't think it's worth the time to do it, unless you have a situation like we mentioned earlier where you have some elderly employees and you who are insisting on coming back to work. Maybe you could try something like that with them, but again, even if they come back to work and then get sick, the employer is probably going to be on the hook for that. So I wouldn't recommend going the waiver route unless your attorney is telling you need it for some specific situation, or your insurance company.
All right. We are at the top of the hour, but I'm going to ask one more question to Lori. Brian asked, and a little follow-up from Mike. Brian asked, does the 8 weeks start from when you applied for the loan, were approved, or when you received the loan? And then what are the first few things that a small business needs to do once they receive the loan?
The 8 weeks starts when you receive the funding. So as soon as that money hits your bank account, you have 8 weeks to spend it on. It doesn't mean you have to spend it in those 8 weeks. You just know that anything after the 8 weeks will become a loan. But the 8 weeks clock starts when you receive the funding. And what I've recommended, and I think that it just depends on each person, but and each company. But what we've done and what we've recommended is to put that money in a separate account. You don't have to do that. It does cause some challenges, with payroll and things like that, having to, move money over. But the way that we've recommended is put that money in a separate account for it in extreme amount of detail. And you don't necessarily have to move your payroll funding account to that account, but you can just use the same payroll funding account if you want, and then just account for it and move that money over for payroll. We're taking the extreme record keeping approach. So if you have a CFO, accountant, or CPA, or bookkeeper, or even the business owner, whoever does those duties, just keep it, you want to keep it accounted for in detail. So keeping receipts, keeping payments out to the utilities for the utility companies, and internet and phone, rent, mortgage interest, just keeping, extreme amount of detail in your accounting system on what is, you could use a spreadsheet. It doesn't really matter right now, just making sure that you keep accurate detail of where each dollar went. And on the payroll side, it's going to be a little bit challenging because you've got to make sure that you subtract out employer tax. You've got to subtract out anything over people making over 100,000 prorated over that period of time. You've got to subtract that out, and some of the tax credit piece too, that from the Families First Act. So our reports will be able to do that for you on the payroll side, but I just recommend, making sure you're just keeping really good track of information and holding those receipts and keeping them somewhere separate, so that when we finally have guidance on what the application looks like, you're ready to go with the documentation.
Great. Thank you so much. All right. Well, I think that's it for us. Thank you to Lori, Scott, and Matt for sitting in and doing our panel today. And thank you guys very much for attending. We will.
Before we stop, just real quick, sorry. I wanted to thank everybody too for, I know this is, we're trying to do as much as we can as quickly as we can. Sometimes there might be noise in the background, just like everybody else trying to work remote. But we appreciate all of your feedback and all of your attention to this and all of your great questions that you're submitting. And we would love to have feedback from you after this. What did you like? What did you not like? What would you like to see more of? And just please keep us, keep that feedback coming, because that's what we're trying to tailor this as to whatever, whatever's important to you guys. So thank you again. Go ahead, Barb. Sorry.
You're fine. I was just going to finish up with, within the next 24 hours, you guys will receive a follow-up email with a link to this recording and the handouts and resources that our team has been working hard to put together for you guys. So thank you, everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
Right.
All right.